co-wife conflict, intra-household abuse, neglect, and homicide, cortisol levels in children, step-siblings versus blood-related siblings, spousal homicide, domestic violence, and physical coercion. So I've noticed a steep rise in this interest in non-monogamous relationships. Everyone wants to try out polygamy or polyamory or polyandry even for that matter. And it's super interesting to me how this thing is shaping up, because I've always heard growing up that monogamous societies are better, monogamous relationships are better, and they're more stable for the kids and for society in general. But how true is that statement? Are polygamous societies any better or worse than, let's say, monogamous societies? So I wanted to do my research on this, and I found this brilliant study. It's called The Puzzle of Monogamous Marriage, and it's authored by Joseph Henrich and two more authors. And it completely breaks down all the nuanced details about monogamous relationships and polygamous relationships. There isn't enough data on polyamorous or polyandrous relationships because they are statistically insignificant. So it looked at monogamous relationships and polygamous relationships, and there's so many juicy details. I can't wait to share it with you. The first claim by the study is monogamous marriage reduces the intensity of intrasexual competition. When society is monogamous at large, there's enough women for every man and there's enough men for every woman, right? It's not like one man has multiple women and a few men have no women. So basically, logically, it makes sense that, yeah, obviously it's going to drive down the competition, but the study has to provide some evidence. And there's actually both longitudinal and cross-sectional data on this. So if we look at the longitudinal data, it shows that data from Mormon communities between 1830 and 1890 show that intrasexual competition declined dramatically as governmental forces suppressed polygynous marriage. Males faced nearly 2.5 times the selective intensity faced by females. By the latter part of the 19th century, this ratio had dropped and leveled off at 1.17, indicating that men faced only slightly more competition than women. Then there's cross-sectional data as well, which shows us that the 1830 Mormon value of 2.14 IMIF is similar to that observed in other polygynous societies, such as the Yanomamo of Venezuela, Arabs in Chad, or the Dogon in Mali. The value of 1.17 among the late 19th century American Mormons falls between the 1.25 of contemporary Americans and the 0.81 of historical Finland, which was from 1745 to 1900. So even the cross-sectional data is proving this point that yes, there is more competition. The IMIF values, basically the higher the value is, the more competition there is. Figure 1 contrasts the amount of sexual competition in societies with normative monogamy and those without it. So this figure basically shows us, let me show you guys real quick. This figure right here shows us the higher the IMIF value goes up, there is more competition. Look, so here's monogamous norms and institutions. This is where it's at, very close to 1, and this is when there's no norms and institutions for monogamous marriage, and look how steeper the competition has become. This combination of longitudinal and cross-sectional evidence converges to suggest that normative monogamy does indeed reduce intrasexual competition. While that is obvious, we also have data to support the claim. What are the implications of this competition? The study outlines 3 major implications, and we're going to get right into them. All right, so implication 1, normative monogamy reduces crime. Again, there's cross-sectional data and longitudinal data to support this claim. Let's get into it real quick. Cross-sectional data show that unmarried men are more likely than married men to commit murder, robbery, and rape. Moreover, unmarried men are more likely than married men to gamble and abuse drugs and alcohol. Sampson et al. Used longitudinal data that tracked boys once in a Massachusetts reform school from age 17 to 70. Across all crimes, marriage reduced a man's likelihood of committing a crime by 35%. For property and violent crimes, being married cuts the probability of committing a crime by half. When men are divorced or widowed, their crime goes up. Analysis also showed that good marriages are even more effective than average marriages. Marrying a criminal wife has the opposite effect. So if you marry like a drug dealer wife or whatever, you're probably going to become a drug dealer or just more criminal in general, which is insane. Then we have findings from the Nebraska inmates. So here it goes. Marriage reduces a man's probability of committing a crime by roughly half. Again, by roughly half. All this data is showing that it does it by roughly half. Interestingly, unmarried cohabitation does not reduce crime rates. So just living with your partner is not enough. You have to get married to them. Something about saying the vows or maybe signing the documents, the government documents, makes men go, all right, no crime anymore. By far, the biggest factor in increasing an individual's crime propensities was taking drugs. And this is important because the cross-sectional data showed us that unmarried men are more likely than married men to gamble and abuse drugs and alcohol. And here we go. Marriage also reduced binge drinking and use of marijuana. Thus, marriage probably has both direct effects on committing crimes and indirect effects via a reduction in personal abuse. So the direct relation is when you just get married to the wife and your crime goes down in general. But there's also indirect reduction because it also helps in reducing drug abuse problems. And here it says again, cohabitation also reduces substance abuse, but less effectively than does marriage. Like, think about it. Just living with the girl is not enough. You have to get married. That's so interesting to me. Then we're looking at sex ratios. Basically, they considered, well, what if just the sex ratios are skewed? In China, sex ratios rose markedly from 1.053 to 1.095 between 1988 and 2004, nearly doubling the number of unmarried or surplus men. At the same time, crime rates nearly doubled, 90% of which were committed by men. So if the sex ratios get skewed, it shows that in China, the crime rate doubled and 90% of the crime rate was from men. And looking at India, the effect is large, going from a male to female ratio of 1.12 in Uttar Pradesh to 0.97 in Kerala, cuts the murder rate by half. So I know about this personally because I'm from India, and in Uttar Pradesh, yes, there is more crime. I didn't know that the ratio was like this. I did know that the Kerala ratio was a bit different, like there were more females than males in Kerala, but I had no idea that in Uttar Pradesh there was so many, the ratio was skewed, and it makes sense now. Males living in districts with more males relative to females are more likely to commit murders. That is, the average male gets more murderous when the intrasexual competition is higher. Fascinating. So it's not just that the sex ratio is there, it's that if they're living in congregation, if there's just in general more males living in a place, there's going to be higher crime rates. So when women come into play, the crime rates goes down, which kind of makes sense because if you, let's say, have a girlfriend, you wouldn't be so risky with your things because she's an easy target to attack and you don't want anything to happen to your girlfriend. So it kind of makes sense. This is important because otherwise the increase in murder rates could be attributed merely to an increase in the number of males. Bingo. So it's not just that it is only the increase in the number of males. It's also the fact that there's females living with those males in those areas that is contributing to crime rates going down. All right, implication number 2. Normative monogamy reduces spousal age gap, gender inequality, and fertility. That sounds a bit wrong. Let's see what's going on. Polygynous marriage increases competition for wives as married men remain on the marriage market. Yes, the man has married one wife, now he wants to marry another wife, so competition is higher. Other men also want to marry different wives. The competition is just higher. This increased competition drives down the age of first marriage for females and increases the spousal age gap. Yeah, I'm marrying an 18-year-old today, a 16-year-old tomorrow. That's just how things went in polygynous societies, I suppose. The reduced supply of unmarried women who are absorbed into polygynous marriages causes men of all ages to pursue younger and younger women. Oh God. Once adolescent girls and young women become wives, older husbands strive to protect their young wives from other males to ensure paternity. Makes sense. I want to make sure that the kid she's having is mine. Therefore, I'm going to control a little bit of where she goes, where she hangs out. Is she being snatched away from me from another man? Things like that. They also dominate household decision making. The men dominate household decision making. More competition also motivates men to seek to control their female relatives as demand for wives increases. So this could be their sisters, their cousins, things like that. This results in suppressing women's freedoms, increasing gender inequality, and stimulating domestic violence. Wow. Women's loss of influence on household decision making and their lower age of marriage results in higher fertility. Yeah, so this sounds like a positive, but it's higher in terms of like one woman having multiple babies. And there's a few things that are seriously wrong with that, and we're going to get into that. By contrast, normative monogamy diffuses the pressure to bring younger brides into the marriage market and thereby reduces the spousal age gap, male efforts to control or protect women, gender inequality, and total fertility. So these are all the things that it reduces. All right, then we have this table here, and this table is actually a comparison of data from highly polygynous, less polygynous, and comparable monogamous countries. In highly polygynous countries, more than 10% married men have more than 2 wives. Let's look at this table real quick because this table is actually very telling. All right, so we have highly polygynous countries over here, less polygynous African countries, comparative monogamous countries, and North American / Western Europe. Now look at the number of countries, 28, 20, 58, and 24. And this seems like a decent amount of countries to conduct a whole study on. Look at all these things that change. Females age at first marriage, 19, kind of young, 22, nice, 25, good, 29, kind of on the older side, but still good enough. Then we have age gap, which would be, and this is first wife only. So 6.4 years in polygynous societies, 3.9 in less polygynous African countries, 2.8 in comparative monogamous societies, and 2.4 in American Western Europe. So again, spousal age gap is decreasing. Then total fertility, 6.78, 5.97, 4.62, 1.84. Now you might be thinking, okay, yeah, these societies are more fertile, so there's going to be more babies, makes more sense. But check this out. Child mortality rate by percentage, 19.4% in polygynous societies, 18 in less polygynous societies, 11 in comparative monogamous societies, and North America and Western Europe, 1.4. Think about that. So you're having a lot of babies, but they're all dying. Infant mortality rate, here we go. 12%, 11%, 6.9%, and 1.2%. Monogamy is looking good, eh? And then GDP, which we'll talk about GDP again later, but look at this. GDP per capita, 1985 US dollar. 975, 1574, 2798, 11,950. So you can see how already we can see that polygamous societies are in general more disastrous. The child mortality rate goes up, infant mortality goes up, age gap is increased, female age at first marriage is really low, and obviously GDP per capita is also very low when it comes to polygamous societies. On the other hand, monogamous societies are looking much better in all of these numbers actually. All right, then we have implication 3. Normative monogamy increases gross domestic product per capita, GDP per capita. So here we had Turtle's study, and Turtle's model predicts that through imposing monogamy, fertility rates go down. Yes, we've seen the table. Spousal age gap shrinks. Yes. Saving rates increase. Okay. Bride prices disappear. And GDP per capita goes up substantially. So this is what the model predicted. And let's see what the results were. The main cause of these effects is that men cannot invest in obtaining additional wives or selling daughters, so instead they have fewer children, invest in production, and both save and consume more. Interestingly, Turtle shows that imposing monogamy has a much bigger effect on GDP per capita than increasing the decision-making power of women. Interesting. To explore this, Turtle alters her model so that reproductive decisions are made by women instead of men, but permits polygyny. Okay. In this version of the model, the number of wives per husband declines a bit. Monogamy does not emerge. Interesting. As does fertility. So fertility also declines. Okay. GDP per capita increases and saving rates go up substantially. But the magnitudes of the effects are much smaller than the effects of imposing monogamy. So instead of giving decision-making power to women, what's more effective is actually imposing monogamy. Because if you do give decision-making power to women, monogamy still doesn't occur. But the number of wives does go down. This last line is so gangster. Look, like really read like what this last line is trying to say. Okay. This suggests that cultural group selection should act most directly on social norms that fortify monogamous marriage. Fortify would mean to defend it, rather than directly on those that increase gender equality. So basically this line is saying, like, don't fight for gender equality, fight for monogamous marriage, and gender equality will prevail. All right, so those were the three implications of monogamous marriage reducing the intensity of intersexual competition. The second claim by the study is that normative monogamy reduces intra-household conflict. And this is a more juicier claim, because let me just show you the titles. Co-wife conflict. Oh boy, here we go. Intra-household abuse, neglect, and homicide. Cortisol levels in children. Step-siblings versus blood-related siblings. Spousal homicide, domestic violence, and physical coercion. I'm gonna get into all of these topics, but so far, if you're liking the video, please give it a big like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. All right, co-wife conflict too. I'm excited. Are you guys excited? It is so exciting to me. Let's see what happens among co-wives. Co-wife conflict is very common in polygynous households. Never thought of that. From Anthropology, a review of ethnographic data from 69 polygynous societies from around the globe reveals no case where co-wife relations could be described as harmonious, and no hint that women's access to the means of production had any mitigating impact on conflict. Consistent with this, an in-depth study of a fundamentalist Mormon community in the US found substantial conflict among co-wives. There's just conflict among co-wives, bro. This work also suggests that the creation of step-parents is more common, as men often leave their first wives to be with their newer wives, but they keep the children, which opens the door for abuse and neglect by unrelated mothers. So there's already conflict between co-wives, and then all those wives have their kids, and it leaves the door open for abuse. And when men do get divorced, let's say, with the first wife or whatever, maybe she didn't want to be in a polygynous setting, the men tend to keep the kids, and then the new wife comes in and the kid is just subject to abuse from the new wife. So then we have intra-household abuse, neglect, and homicide. Here we go. Polygynous marriages also create elevated risks of intra-household abuse, neglect, and homicide because such households have lower average relatedness and more unrelated dyads. Unrelated dyads would be relationship between two people who are unrelated, like not related by blood, essentially. Each additional wife is unrelated to the existing co-wives, yes, and to all of these wives' children. Living in the same household with genetically unrelated adults is the single biggest risk factor for abuse, neglect, and homicide of children. That's the biggest factor. So you really want to have like 3 or 4 wives and subject your kids to that. Is that so, Myron Gaines? I'm not calling out or anything. I'm just challenging your opinion. Stepmothers are 2.4 times more likely to kill their stepchildren than birth mothers, obviously. And children living with an unrelated parent are between 15 and 77 times more likely to die accidentally. This is fascinating stuff, bro. I can't believe at some points I thought, yeah, maybe I would want multiple wives. After looking at this stuff, bro, hell no. Are you crazy? I don't want multiple wives. One is enough, right? One is enough. Much empirical work in monogamous societies indicates that higher degrees of relatedness among household members are associated with lower rates of abuse, neglect, and homicide. See? Empirical work suggests that monogamous societies have less intra-household conflict. Then cortisol levels in children. Oh boy, children are stressed out with all these moms you have. Children in nuclear families with only genetic parents showed the lowest cortisol levels. By contrast, children in households with distant relatives, stepfathers, and half-siblings showed the highest cortisol levels of any household composite in the sample. Nuclear families is where it's at. Monogamous nuclear families are good for kids. All right, and then step siblings versus blood-related siblings. Here we go. Research among fundamentalist Mormon communities reveals that the effects of relatedness are evident within polygynous households. Full siblings show greater association, affect solidarity, and altruism when compared with half-siblings in the same household. So even half-siblings, even if you're cousins, is just worse than like actual siblings. Then we have spousal homicide, domestic violence, and physical coercion. Ooh boy. Normative monogamy may reduce spousal homicide, domestic violence, and the use of physical coercion by decreasing the spousal age gap, gender inequality, paternal uncertainty, and mate competition. Wow. So all these factors basically result in overall spousal homicide, domestic violence, and physical coercion going lower. Research indicates that both spousal age gaps and paternity uncertainty are important predictors of spousal homicides. Meanwhile, cross-national regressions reveal that stronger monogamous marriage norms are associated with less domestic violence, maternal mortality, female genital mutilation, and sex trafficking, even after controlling for GDP. Wow. Monogamy is looking good, isn't it? All right, so one of the implications of intra-household conflict being reduced is that monogamous marriage increases parental investment and improves childhood outcomes. So we lack direct evidence for the effects of monogamous marriage and paternal investment, though ethnographic accounts suggest that highly polygynous fathers do not even know all of their children's names. I wonder why. Similar effects occur in North America using data from 19th century Mormons. Health and Haley sorry if I'm butchering your name. Compare data from 90 households consisting of 45 headed by wealthy men, top 2% of wealth in that community, and 45 headed by poor married men from the bottom 16. The children of poor men had better survival rates for their children to the age of 15. We looked at that table earlier. For poor men, 6.9 of their offspring per wife survived on average to age 15, while for wealthy men, only 5.5 of their offspring per wife survived to the age of 15. This is amazing given that the poor men had less than 10% of the wealth of the rich men, and the rich men had significantly more total offsprings, including those that did not make it to 15. Oh my God. So not only did they have more offsprings, they had offsprings that didn't even make it to 15. That's how little they're invested in their kids' life. The kids are just dying, playing, I don't know, or falling in wells or some shit. Perhaps most telling is a comparison of rich with poor men, both with 1 or 2 wives. Poor men's children out-survives rich men's 6.9 to 5.7. Mean number of offspring surviving to age 15 per wife. This supports the idea that poor men with insufficient resources for another wife tend to invest more in their existing offspring, while rich men with the same number of wives invest less in offspring because they are expending resources seeking additional wives. Yeah, so their focus is not on their kids. Their focus is on that new 16-year-old that they want. I'm just joking, YouTube, okay? Come on. All right, so I went down through all these juicy details. I hope you guys kind of got the idea which one is better. I would argue monogamous societies are better, right? I will say this though, the study did say that in societies which are smaller, so some kind of tribal communities or whatever, if there's only like 20 people, let's say, polygynous settings tend to do better in those. But when society gets large enough, monogamy is the way, basically. You guys can check out the study yourself. The link will be in the description below. Please let me know what you guys think about this. Am I saying that everyone has to be monogamous? Well, yeah, but not 100%, but at least like 99%, because even I believe 10% of polygyny is going to have a significant effect on the rest of the population. Guys, thank you for watching the video. Comment down below what you think about this. Are you going to be in a monogamous relationship? Polygamy? Which one's better? I think we know the answer. I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.